my name is Arisma and welcome to our channel. If you're new here, make sure to check out our channel because we post weekly videos to help you ace your med school application. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. Today, we're going to be talking about the abstract reasoning section of the UCAT exam. The abstract reasoning section requires you to identify patterns between sets of shapes and to ignore irrelevant or distracting information. So it assesses your ability to critically think and evaluate information presented to you in the form of shapes and to generate hypotheses on what's similar and different between them. In this section, you're presented with 50 questions and you have 12 minutes to complete the section. This is the fourth section of the UCAT exam. So in today's video, we're going to present you with 6 tips to help you ace the abstract reasoning section of the UCAT exam. Our first tip is to identify similarities between the two sets. It might be hard to find the differences between the two sets at first because there's lots of distracting and irrelevant information which can get overwhelming. Identifying similarities means you can rule out a common denominator and look at the next property of these shapes and try to identify a difference. Abstract reasoning is quite an overwhelming section and identifying similarities first may help ease that a bit. Our second tip is to find a pattern of the sets first and then look at the answer choices. If you look at the answer choices first, you're more likely to look at just one option and think that yes, that has the correct pattern. Even though that pattern may not be right, it may just apply to one box and you're more likely to make mistakes that way and to get biased towards that answer choice. Instead, use your brain, critically evaluate the information given to you and identify a pattern first, then apply it to the answer choices and see which answer choice fits the correct answer. Our third tip is to start with the simplest box. The simplest box will usually have the least amount of distractors and the least amount of irrelevant information, so you're more likely to identify the correct pattern by looking at the simplest box in both the sets. Our fourth tip is to use acronyms to help you identify patterns between sets. So a really popular mnemonic that's used is SPONKS, which stands for shape, position, orientation, number, color, and size. So these are some common characteristics that differ between sets, and by going through this checklist or this mnemonic, you can go through each of these properties, see if there are differences between the shape, position, and so on, and try to identify a pattern for that set. Some other characteristics to also look out for are lines of symmetry, the number of intersections, angles formed between two clock hands, and so on. Our fifth tip is to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Sometimes students get very involved in finding specific patterns and something really tiny and really small that differs between sets, for example. Sometimes it's not that hard and the pattern's actually really obvious, but because this section is so hard on time and it's also just generally quite a hard section, students get overwhelmed. Try not to be overwhelmed and take a step back, especially if you're stuck on a particular section, and just look at the bigger picture and try to see any obvious differences between the two sets. This might help you, especially if you're stuck on a particular question. If not, always remember you can flag that question and move on. Don't waste time and be efficient with your time management. Our sixth and final tip is to learn from your mistakes. As I've mentioned before, the abstract reasoning section is quite overwhelming and quite a lot of students find it hard. I was one of them and I used to perform quite poorly on the abstract reasoning section. The single most helpful and useful tip that I can give from my experience is to learn from your mistakes. When I would get a question wrong, I would note down the correct pattern that existed between set A and set B and make a list of those patterns. In the abstract reasoning section, patterns often repeat themselves. So by the end of my preparation, I had a list of hundreds of patterns that came up in practice questions that I had attempted, and the day before my exam I went through all of these patterns, which greatly helped me. So that's it for today's video. If you have any more questions on the abstract reasoning section, make sure to leave them down in the comments below and we'll get to you as soon as possible. We hope you found this video useful and see you in the next one.